At a small fairground in Cedar Grove, where autumn leaves danced on gentle breezes and festival lights twinkled like earthbound stars, no one noticed the moment that would change their tight-knit community forever. 6-year-old Emma Mitchell, her golden pigtails bouncing with each step, clutched a half-eaten cotton candy as she wandered through the bustling crowd, mesmerized by the swirling colors and cheerful chaos of the town's annual harvest festival. Her mother, Sarah, manning the pie-judging booth, glanced up occasionally to check on Emma, who had been playing near the face-painting station. But in the sea of moving bodies and excited chatter, Sarah couldn't spot those familiar pigtails anymore. "She's probably with Tom," she thought, referring to her husband who was helping set up the evening's fireworks display. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fairground as families laughed and children squealed with delight on carnival rides. Vendors called out their wares, the smell of caramel apples and funnel cakes wafting through the air. The Mitchell family had attended this festival every year since Emma was born, and she knew most of the familiar faces in their small town of barely 3,000 people. But when Sarah finished her shift and couldn't find Emma, a cold tendril of fear crept into her heart. She rushed to find Tom, her steps quickening with each passing moment. The crowd seemed to thicken, faces becoming a blur as panic began to set in. She spotted her husband near the festival's main stage, carefully arranging the evening's pyrotechnics. "I thought she was with you," Tom said, his face paling as Sarah approached. Those 5 words sent their world spiraling into chaos. Within minutes, the festive atmosphere transformed into one of growing panic. The police were called, and Officer Martinez, who'd known Emma since she was born, immediately organized search parties. She was wearing a blue dress with yellow flowers. Sarah's voice trembled as she described her daughter to the gathering crowd. "White sneakers with rainbow laces. Please, please help us find her." The town of Cedar Grove mobilized like a well-oiled machine. Store owners closed their shops to join the search, and farmers arrived with flashlights and determination etched on their weathered faces. As dusk approached, the woods bordering the fairground looked increasingly ominous. Emma, drawn by the sight of a butterfly with wings that seemed to shimmer like magic, had wandered past the tree line hours ago. Now, lost in the growing darkness, she huddled against a large oak tree, her cotton candy long forgotten, her small voice calling out for Mommy and Daddy growing hoarser with each cry. The festival lights, once so magical, now cast eerie shadows through the trees, and the distant sound of searchers calling her name only made Emma more confused and frightened. She didn't know that help was already on its way, coming from the most unexpected source imaginable, a source that would prove that sometimes guardian angels walk on 4 paws. Tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where life changed in the blink of an eye? Where were you when it happened? Your story matters, and we'd love to hear it. Just over the hill from the fairground, in a modest house with a well-worn fence, lived Mr. Thompson, a Vietnam veteran whose only companion was a retired police dog named Max. The German Shepherd's muzzle had grown gray with age, his deep brown coat showing hints of silver. But his amber eyes retained the sharp intelligence that had made him legendary in the K-9 unit before an injury forced his retirement. Even now, he carried himself with the dignity of his service years. As evening shadows lengthened across Cedar Grove, Max's ears suddenly pricked forward. Something wasn't right. The distant festival music carried on the wind, but beneath it, his keen senses detected distress, a child's fear, carried on the breeze like a whispered plea for help. Mr. Thompson, dozing in his weathered armchair after tending to his small garden, didn't notice when Max began pacing restlessly by the back door, his nails clicking softly against the wooden floor. Max hadn't forgotten his years of service, the countless lives he'd saved, the missing persons he'd tracked through rain and darkness. Each mission was etched into his memory like the scars he carried beneath his fur. Though his badge was now just a memory hanging on Mr. Thompson's wall, alongside faded photographs of his police unit, the instinct to protect remained as strong as ever. With determined focus, Max nosed open the loose board in the fence he'd discovered months ago. but never used. Until now, the aging shepherd had kept this escape route secret, perhaps knowing someday it would be needed. The cooling evening air carried a mixture of scents: the sweetness of cotton candy from the festival, the mustiness of fallen leaves, and underneath it all, the distinct trace of human fear. Freedom achieved, Max paused only briefly to lift his nose to the wind, confirming the direction of his mission. His powerful legs, though not as swift as in his prime, carried him purposefully toward the woods. The setting sun painted long shadows across his path as he navigated through the underbrush, following an invisible trail that only his extraordinary senses could detect. Meanwhile, Emma huddled tighter against the oak tree, her small frame shaking with cold and fear. The forest had grown dark and unfamiliar, every rustle of leaves making her jump. She'd tried walking but only seemed to get more lost, each tree looking exactly like the last. Her throat hurt from crying, and her pretty blue dress was smudged with dirt and tears. The sound of approaching footsteps made Emma freeze in terror. But instead of the monster her imagination feared, a large dog emerged from the shadows. Max moved slowly, his training kicking in as he recognized the signs of a frightened child. His tail wagged gently, and his ears remained relaxed, showing no aggression, using the same careful approach he'd learned for dealing with frightened victims during his service years. Emma's eyes widened as she watched the dog approach. Despite her fear, something about his gentle demeanor called to her. "Doggy?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Max inched closer, allowing her to see him clearly in the fading light. His gray muzzle and kind eyes reminded her of her grandmother's old dog, and some of her fear began to melt away. In that moment, a bond began to form that would change both their lives forever. Through the darkening woods, Max led Emma with the careful precision that had earned him countless commendations in his police career. His powerful nose kept them away from the steep ravine to the north, choosing instead a gentler path that his young companion could manage. Emma clutched handfuls of his fur, her small legs struggling to keep up with his measured pace, her blue dress catching on brambles as they moved through the forest. "Are you taking me home?" Emma asked, her voice small but trusting. Max responded with a soft woof, pausing occasionally to ensure she was still steady on her feet. When they reached a shallow stream cutting through their path, Max's training kicked in. He demonstrated how to cross by picking his way across the stones, then waited patiently as Emma followed, stepping carefully from rock to rock. "Just like hopscotch," she said, gaining confidence with each step. Max stayed close, ready to steady her if she slipped. The bond between them grew stronger with each obstacle they overcame together. When a distant owl hooted, making Emma jump, Max pressed closer to her side, his presence reassuring and steady against the growing darkness. They took brief rests when Emma's steps began to falter, Max always positioning himself between her and the deeper darkness of the forest. During one such break, Emma talked to him softly, sharing secrets as children often do with animals they trust. "My mommy makes the best chocolate chip cookies," she whispered, her small hand stroking his fur. "When we get home, I'll ask her to make you some. And maybe you can come to my tea parties. My other stuffed animals would like you." Max's ears constantly moved, monitoring their surroundings with the expertise of his years in service. His eyes scanned the shadows, detecting and avoiding potential dangers, the skunk marking its territory nearby, the raccoon family foraging in the underbrush. Every choice he made was calculated to keep Emma safe and guide her toward home, drawing upon all his training and instinct. The darkness grew deeper, but Max's night vision was excellent. He chose paths with clear ground, steering Emma away from thorny bushes and treacherous roots. When branches hung too low, he would stop and wait until she ducked under them. His own fatigue began to set in, his injured hip protesting each step. But Max pressed on, driven by the same sense of duty that had guided him through his years of service. Emma's trust in Max grew with each passing moment. When her feet caught on a root, sending her stumbling forward, Max was there instantly, his solid form helping her regain her balance. "You're my good dog," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "My brave good dog, like the police dogs Daddy shows me on TV." Rain began to sprinkle through the canopy above, and a cool wind rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of an approaching storm. Max knew they needed to find shelter soon. His sensitive ears picked up distant voices calling Emma's name, but they were still too far away. For now, his priority was keeping his young charge safe and warm through what promised to be a challenging night, and he was determined to fulfill this mission, just as he had all others in his distinguished career. Back at the fairground, the search had transformed into a massive operation. Police cars lined the parking lot, their lights painting the gathering darkness in alternating red and blue, casting an eerie glow across the now silent carnival rides. Officer Martinez coordinated with neighboring counties, his voice tense as he spoke into his radio, years of training barely masking his personal concern for a child he'd known since birth. Sarah and Tom Mitchell huddled together near the command post, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Volunteers brought them coffee and blankets, but neither could focus on anything except their missing daughter. "She's just a baby," Sarah whispered, clutching her husband's hand. "She's never spent a night alone." Tom wrapped his arm around her shoulders, trying to provide comfort while battling his own rising panic. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson had finally stirred from his evening nap to find Max missing. At first, he wasn't concerned, until he heard the sirens and saw the emergency lights flashing in the distance. The retired veteran sat up straighter in his worn armchair, his military instincts coming alive. Something in his gut, honed by years in Vietnam, told him these events were connected. He grabbed his jacket and flashlight, muscles remembering the urgency of combat as he headed toward the woods. As he walked, memories of Max's service days flooded back. He remembered the stories Max's former handler had shared when arranging the adoption 3 years ago. "This dog has a sixth sense about people in trouble," the handler had said, showing Mr. Thompson photographs of Max in his prime. "Saved my life twice in drug raids, found 4 missing kids over his career, but that injury means he can't serve anymore." Mr. Thompson had taken Max in, understanding the unique bond between veterans, whether human or canine. The search teams moved through the forest in organized grids, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like silver blades. But the woods were vast, stretching for miles in every direction, and every minute that passed felt like an eternity. Officer Martinez knew the statistics about missing children, statistics he refused to share with the Mitchells, though they haunted his thoughts as the night grew darker. "We've got the state police helicopter coming," he announced, trying to sound optimistic as he addressed the growing crowd of volunteers. "They've got infrared cameras. If she's out there, we'll find her." The "if" hung heavy in the air, unspoken but heard by everyone. The temperature was dropping, and storm clouds gathered ominously overhead. Mr. Thompson approached the command post, his presence drawing curious glances. The reclusive veteran rarely came to town events, and many younger residents didn't even know his name. "My dog," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "My German Shepherd, Max. He's missing too. Former police K9. Officer Martinez's eyes lit up with recognition. "Max? The tracking dog from Capital City?" When Mr. Thompson nodded, the officer quickly pulled out his phone, showing him a photo of Emma. "If Max found her, then she's got the best protection in the county," Mr. Thompson finished. For the first time since Emma's disappearance, a glimmer of hope appeared in Sarah's eyes. The veteran turned to the woods, his expression determined. "I know his bark. If he's found her, he'll let us know." Thunder rumbled in the distance as dark clouds gathered overhead. The approaching storm added urgency to an already desperate situation. But now they had something new to listen for, the distinctive bark of a retired hero who might have one more rescue left in him. The storm hit with sudden fury, sending sheets of cold rain through the forest canopy. Max's training immediately kicked in as he guided Emma beneath a massive fallen oak, its upturned roots and thick trunk creating a natural shelter from the worst of the weather. The German Shepherd positioned himself at the entrance, his body shielding Emma from the wind and rain that slanted in. "I'm scared," Emma whimpered, pressing herself against Max's warm fur. Her dress was damp and she shivered despite the dog's warmth. Max responded by curling tighter around her, sharing his body heat the way he'd once done with injured victims during his service years. His own exhaustion weighed heavily, but his protective instincts wouldn't allow him to rest. Through the darkness, lightning occasionally illuminated their shelter, followed by booming thunder that made Emma bury her face in Max's fur. During these bright flashes, Max's eyes reflected his unwavering focus. Though his joints ached from the dampness and cold, he remained vigilant, his ears constantly moving to track any sounds through the storm. Meanwhile, Emma's parents huddled under a tent at the search command post, refusing to leave despite the weather. Sarah clutched her daughter's favorite stuffed rabbit, which had been found near the festival grounds. "She must be so frightened," she whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. Tom held her close, his own prayers silent but desperate. A particularly loud thunderclap sent Emma into fresh tears. Max gently licked her face, an instinctive gesture of comfort that made her giggle despite her fear. "You're a good doggy," she said, her small hands clutching his fur. "Like in my storybooks, where dogs save people." Max's tail thumped softly against the ground, his eyes never leaving the darkness beyond their shelter. The storm's intensity began to affect the search efforts. Flashlight beams barely penetrated the heavy rain, and the helicopter had to temporarily suspend operations. Officer Martinez paced anxiously, knowing that time was critical but also aware of the risks to his search teams in these conditions. Max's training and instincts warred with his physical limitations. His injured hip, which had ended his police career, throbbed with the cold and damp. But each time Emma shivered or whimpered, he found new reserves of strength. He'd protected countless lives during his service years, but something about this small, trusting child awakened an even deeper sense of purpose. Through the rain, Max could smell the searchers, still too far away but moving in various directions. He knew they needed to move soon. The temperature was dropping, and Emma's shivering was getting worse. But movement in this weather carried its own risks. For now, he focused on keeping her warm and calm, conserving their energy for when the storm passed. Emma had begun to doze, exhausted from fear and cold. Her small body curled trustingly against Max's side. He remained alert, his body tense and ready, a guardian between her and whatever dangers the night might bring. The storm raged on, but beneath the fallen oak, a little girl slept safely under the protection of a hero who refused to fail his final mission. As the storm began to weaken, Max's ears suddenly perked forward. Through the diminishing rain, he caught the faint sound of voices and the distant beam of flashlights sweeping through the trees. He gave Emma, still huddled against him, a gentle nudge. She stirred, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but the urgency in Max's movement made her focus. "Did you hear something?" she whispered, her small hand clutching his fur. Max stood carefully, his muscles stiff from hours of keeping watch, but his training took over as he assessed their situation. The searchlights were still far off, but for the first time, he could detect them moving in the right direction. Max knew they needed to make their presence known. In his prime, he would have left Emma briefly to alert the searchers, but his protective instincts wouldn't allow him to leave her alone now. Instead, he threw his head back and let out a powerful bark, the same distinct sound that had once guided SWAT teams to hidden suspects. The bark echoed through the wet forest, causing Emma to jump slightly. "That was loud," she said, managing a tired smile. Max barked again, a pattern he'd learned in his service years. 3 sharp barks, a pause, then 3 more. It was a signal he'd used countless times before, and he prayed it would work one last time. At the command post, Mr. Thompson's head snapped up. "That's him!" he shouted, startling the searchers around him. "That's Max's bark! I'd know it anywhere!" Officer Martinez quickly radioed all search teams, directing them toward the sound. The veteran's ears, still sharp from years of combat, helped pinpoint the direction. Max could sense the searchers changing course, moving toward them now with renewed purpose. He kept up his barking pattern, even as his throat grew hoarse with effort. Emma stood on shaky legs, holding onto his fur for support. "Are they coming for us?" she asked hopefully, and Max responded with an encouraging whine. The flashlight beams grew closer, cutting through the misty aftermath of the storm. Max's strength was fading, the night of vigilance taking its toll on his aging body. But he pressed on, his barks, though weaker now, continued to guide the searchers toward them. He could smell Mr. Thompson among them, the familiar scent giving him a final surge of energy. "Over here!" a voice called out, much closer now. "I think I see something!" The flashlight beams converged, and suddenly the dark forest was illuminated. Emma squinted at the bright lights, pressing closer to Max, who stood protectively beside her despite his exhaustion. Mr. Thompson was the first to break through the underbrush, followed closely by Officer Martinez and Tom Mitchell. "Emma!" Tom cried out, his voice breaking with emotion. But before rushing to her, they all stopped, struck by the scene before them. A small girl in a muddy blue dress, standing fearlessly beside a gray-muzzled German shepherd, who, even now, maintained his protective stance. The moment of rescue had finally arrived, but Max's vigil wasn't over yet. He needed to make sure his charge was safely returned to her family. After all, a guardian's job isn't done until the mission is complete. The reunion scene unfolded like a dream in the rain-washed forest. "Daddy!" Emma cried out, finally recognizing her father among the flashlight beams. She started forward but then paused, turning back to Max as if unwilling to leave her protector. Tom approached slowly, tears streaming down his face, understanding the delicate bond that had formed between his daughter and this remarkable dog. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly, kneeling in the damp earth. "You can bring your friend with you." Emma reached for her father with one hand while keeping her other firmly tangled in Max's fur. The old German shepherd moved with her, his protective instinct still engaged despite the presence of rescuers. Sarah's voice carried through the trees as she ran toward them, alerted by the radio calls. "My baby! Oh, my baby!" she sobbed, joining her husband and daughter on the ground. The family embraced, their tears mixing with the lingering raindrops, while Max stood guard over their reunion, his duty not yet complete in his mind. Mr. Thompson watched the scene with misty eyes, recognition of Max's unwavering service bringing back memories of his own military days. When Max finally looked his way, the old veteran saw both exhaustion and satisfaction in his companion's eyes. "Well done, soldier," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Well done." Officer Martinez quickly radioed in the successful rescue, his professional demeanor cracking as he watched Emma safe in her parents' arms. "We found her," he reported, his voice thick. "Max found her. She's cold and tired but appears unharmed." Cheers erupted from the radios as the news spread through the search teams. The paramedics who had been standing by quickly moved in to check Emma over. As they wrapped her in warm blankets, she refused to let go of Max, insisting he stay close. The old dog, despite his obvious exhaustion, remained steadfast beside her until she was cleared by the medical team. "He kept me safe," Emma told everyone who would listen, her small hand still buried in Max's fur. "He found me when I was scared and showed me where to go when it rained. He's my hero." The adults exchanged knowing looks, understanding that Max's police training and protective instincts had likely saved Emma's life. Sarah knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. "Thank you," she whispered, her tears dampening his fur. "Thank you for protecting our little girl." Max's tail wagged gently as he accepted her gratitude, finally allowing himself to relax as he realized his mission was truly complete. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, ready to take Max home, but Emma's small voice stopped him. "Can he stay with me a little longer?" she pleaded. "Just until we get home?" The old veteran smiled, understanding the bond that had formed between them. Some connections, he knew, went beyond ordinary explanation. As the group made their way out of the forest, Max walked between Emma and her parents, his steps tired but proud. He had lived up to his training one final time, proving that a hero's heart never truly retires. The night that began in fear would be remembered for something far more powerful, the extraordinary bond between a lost little girl and her four-legged guardian angel. The story of Max and Emma spread through Cedar Grove like wildfire, transforming both the retired police dog and the reclusive veteran into local celebrities. The local newspaper ran a front-page story titled "Four-Legged Hero, the Dog Who Wouldn't Give Up," complete with a photo of Max sitting proudly beside a beaming Emma. For Mr. Thompson, the change was profound. After years of keeping to himself, he found his small house becoming a gathering place for visitors wanting to thank Max and hear the story firsthand. Emma's family visited regularly, bringing homemade treats for Max and gradually drawing the veteran out of his self-imposed isolation. "You know," Mr. Thompson said one evening as he watched Max and Emma playing in his backyard, "I got Max because I thought he needed saving. Retired police dog, injured in the line of duty. Reminded me of myself in some ways." He paused, his weathered face softening. "Never thought he'd end up saving me too." Sarah, who had brought over a fresh apple pie, understood the deeper meaning in his words. The rescue hadn't just reunited Emma with her family. It had created new bonds throughout the community. The veteran who once barely spoke to his neighbors now found himself sharing stories of his military service and Max's police career with an attentive audience. The emotional healing spread beyond just Mr. Thompson. Other veterans in town, drawn by the story, began stopping by. Soon, his front porch became an unofficial gathering spot where old soldiers could share their experiences and find understanding among those who'd walked similar paths. Emma's regular visits brought laughter and light to the once quiet house. She would sit for hours listening to Mr. Thompson's stories about Max's police days while the old dog lay contentedly at her feet. The nightmares that had plagued her after getting lost gradually faded, replaced by memories of the brave dog who had kept her safe. "Max knew exactly what I needed," Emma told her mother one day. "When I was scared, he made me feel brave. When I was cold, he kept me warm. He was like my guardian angel." Sarah hugged her daughter close, still emotional when thinking about that terrifying night. The transformation in Max was equally remarkable. Despite his age and previous injury, he seemed rejuvenated by his new role as Emma's protector. The bond between them remained unbreakable, and he would perk up visibly whenever her voice carried across the yard. Town officials, moved by the story, began discussing ways to honor Max's heroism. But for those closest to the events, the real tribute was in the quiet moments. Emma reading stories to Max on Mr. Thompson's porch, the veteran teaching her about dog training, and the way the community had come together. Sometimes the greatest heroes, Mr. Thompson reflected, watching Emma crown Max with a daisy chain, are the ones who remind us we're not alone. The old dog looked up at him with wise eyes, as if to say he had known this truth all along. The day of Max's ceremony dawned bright and clear, with autumn leaves dancing in the gentle breeze across Cedar Grove's town square. The entire community had turned out, creating a sea of faces all focused on the makeshift stage where Max sat regally beside Mr. Thompson, his gray muzzle lifted proudly despite his advancing years. The mayor, a usually formal man, spoke with genuine emotion about the night that had changed their town. "Today, we honor not just a hero," he announced, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "but the spirit of protection and service that Max represents. His actions remind us that courage comes in many forms." Emma, dressed in a new blue dress that matched the ribbon on Max's collar, stepped forward with a special medal commissioned by the town. Her small hands trembled slightly as she approached, but her voice was clear and strong. "Max saved me when I was lost and scared," she said into the microphone. "But he did more than that. He showed me what real bravery looks like." As she placed the medal around Max's neck, the old German shepherd sat perfectly still, his police training evident in his bearing. The inscription read, "To Max, guardian angel of Cedar Grove. The crowd erupted in applause, and Max's tail wagged gently, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. Mr. Thompson then took the podium, something that would have been unthinkable just months ago. His voice, rough with emotion, shared stories from Max's police service days. He told of lives saved, criminals apprehended, and the injury that had ended his career but not his spirit of service. Max was already a hero before he found Emma, the veteran explained, his hand resting on the dog's head. He served with distinction in the K-9 unit, earning commendations and saving countless lives. But what he did that night in the forest, that wasn't just training. That was heart. Officers from Max's former unit had traveled to attend the ceremony, each sharing brief stories of working with him. Their presence added a deeper dimension to the celebration, highlighting how one dog's lifetime of service had touched so many lives. The ceremony concluded with Emma reading a poem she had written herself, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "My hero has 4 paws and a heart of gold. He found me when I was lost in the cold. He kept me safe through the darkest night, my guardian angel, my guiding light." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd as she finished. Max, sensing the emotion of the moment, gently nuzzled her hand, drawing a bright smile from the little girl. The bond between them, forged in those dangerous hours in the forest, had only grown stronger with time. As the formal celebrations ended and people mingled in the square, sharing refreshments and stories, Mr. Thompson watched Max and Emma playing nearby. The sight of his retired police dog, gray-muzzled but still dignified, wearing his new medal while entertaining a giggling 6-year-old, filled his heart with pride. Sometimes he realized the greatest acts of heroism come not from grand gestures, but from simple, unwavering loyalty. The legacy of Max's heroism became a permanent part of Cedar Grove's landscape. In the park near where Emma had first gone missing, a bronze statue now stood, a German shepherd alert and watchful, his pose capturing the nobility that Max embodied. Children often left treats at its base, and parents used the story to teach their little ones about bravery and trust. Max's daily routine now included regular visits to Emma's house, where he was treated as part of the family. Despite his advancing years, he would perk up every time Emma returned from school, ready to listen to her stories about her day. Sarah always kept his favorite treats in a special jar on the kitchen counter, and Tom had built him a comfortable bed on their covered porch. Mr. Thompson found peace in watching their bond grow. The once reclusive veteran now hosted weekly gatherings where local children could learn about dog training and safety. "Max taught me that it's never too late to open your heart," he would say, watching his faithful companion gently guide young hands learning the proper way to approach a dog. The town's annual Harvest Festival, once a reminder of that frightening night, had been transformed. A new tradition emerged where local rescue dogs and their handlers would give demonstrations with Max as the guest of honor. Though he no longer participated actively, his presence inspired a new generation of service dogs and handlers. Emma, now known as Max's girl around town, took her role as his special friend seriously. She would brush his fur gently, mindful of his aging joints, and read to him from her school books. "You'll always be my hero," she would whisper to him, curled up beside him on his bed. Max's response was always the same, a gentle tail wag and a loving look from his wise old eyes. The story of Max and Emma became more than just a tale of rescue. It became a reminder that heroes come in all forms, that age doesn't diminish courage, and that the purest form of love often comes with 4 paws and an unwavering heart. The bonds formed that stormy night had healed not just a frightened little girl, but an entire community. Mr. Thompson, watching Max doze in the afternoon sun with Emma reading beside him, finally understood the full circle of their journey. His injured police dog, whom he'd thought needed saving, had not only saved a child but had helped heal his own wounded spirit. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest acts of heroism create ripples that touch lives in ways we never expect. As the sun set over Cedar Grove, casting long shadows across Max's statue in the park. The town stood as a testament to the extraordinary impact of one dog's unwavering courage and devotion. Max had shown them all that sometimes angels don't wear halos. Sometimes they walk on four paws, with hearts full of courage and love that knows no bounds. If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Have you ever experienced the unconditional love of a special animal in your life? Tell us your story in the comments below. Remember, heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes they leave paw prints on our hearts forever. We'll see you in the next video, where more incredible stories await.